the Finance and Facilities Committee. Okay, we're all set. Verification of meeting being posted, Ms. Dudley?
Yes, the meeting's been properly posted.
Okay. Opportunities for citizens to speak or correspondence. Any correspondence? No citizens are here to speak. We have a adjourned to executive session per Wisconsin statutes 19.851E for the purpose of conferring with legal counsel regarding contract negotiations. Do we have a need to do that? I believe so.
We do.
Mr. Como? Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. McCaffrey. Is this a roll call vote, I believe?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Como?
Aye.
Mr. Edlin?
Aye.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
And Mr. O'Brien?
Aye. Okay, we'll adjourn to closed session. About how long do you think we'll take here? Probably, could be as much as a half hour, I suppose, right? Okay, very well. She's still working on the computer. Okay, we're back in open session. Next action item is approval of monthly vouchers.
I have two questions from our F&F members. The first one is regarding check from eWell Fleet Services. The question was asked, how many vans do we lease for each school, and what is the total cost per van per year? Right now, we're leasing two Ford E150 8-passenger vans for each of the 3 high schools, and the monthly cost for each van is $364. And the annual cost is $4,368. The leases are for 3 years, and they expire on May 31st of 2015. And it was also asked, does it make sense to purchase more vehicles or lease additional vehicles? And right now, we've been operating with 2 vans at each site for quite some time, and we can evaluate that at the time the leases are expired. But right now, that's one of the things we were looking at, is just 2 vans at each site.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, and I guess I wasn't so much interested in the quantity. I just want to know the quantity.
Sure.
But I didn't know if we ever performed an analysis of should we buy those versus leasing them.
Oh, yes.
So, might just want to take a peek at that at some point in time. Don't know if there's safety factors, there's other things that we need to take into consideration too. You know, leasing, hopefully you're leasing the new vehicles, safety, it's up to par and less maintenance, but it's been a while. I thought we used to own a number of vehicles a year ago, and then we went to the leasing approach, but just didn't know if we should take a peek at that at maybe some point in time this year to see if it still makes sense to lease versus buy.
Okay.
Mr. Edlin?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Coleman. I brought that same point up about 4 years ago. Exact same question. And I also had a concern about employee travel within the district. I don't know, I guess some question came up about whether we should have a specified vehicle, especially for our internet-based school where they have to go to other areas to test students. They have to go to the students', I guess, home district or something, and there's quite a bit of travel that's done there. And we pay out quite a bit in employee travel expenses, and I'm just wondering if it's more cost-effective to have a district-owned vehicle for long trips like that, or even within the district for some teachers that have to travel from building to building to building. I don't know. But something to maybe look at? I don't.
We do have a couple of vehicles that on occasion are available. So anybody who is scheduled to make one of those longer trips are supposed to check in to see if it's available so that they can use a district vehicle. Most
Okay.
of them don't like to. It's inconvenient because they have to come here to get it versus leaving directly from their home.
Are we in any position of liability with employees using their own vehicles for company purposes? I know that my insurance doesn't cover
Their
me.
insurance is primary. Yeah, when they're driving their own vehicle, they're primary.
If I'm driving my own vehicle for work purposes, I'm not covered.
Then your policy may
Policy?
exclude you, but
Yeah.
typically, if it's a personal vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
they're primary.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And then secondly was a question, regarding a check for Unisource, which is our paper provider. The question was, what's the total cost for the paper for the year for the district? And are we consuming less paper over time? And right now, we spent with Uniforce, through the 13-14 fiscal year, we spent $132,000. It was a 15.4% reduction from the previous fiscal year, but that's really hard to say if we're using less paper over time, because there could have been some intermittent factors like a large purchase of paper. But we are, when we're looking at implementing the iPads at all of the sites, we're looking at maybe cutting back on the printers. And so we're going to evaluate that because the 3-year contract is up with Unisource. And we're going to look at evaluating, what are some other ways that we can reduce printers at the sites to cut down on paper costs.
Okay, and that's really, you got at the heart of what I was looking at, Joe, is the trend should be going down. And, with some of the implementation of the new technologies, and just wanted to get a sense of that.
Sure.
And maybe that's something we can periodically talk on too over time, so.
Okay.
Anything else on monthly vouchers? Do I have a motion for approval of the vouchers? Mr. Edlin?
I motion to approve the vouchers as presented.
Second. Second, Mr. McCaffrey. Motion second to approve. All approval, say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion passes 5-0 without objection. Okay, item number 2 is approval and award of guaranteed energy savings performance contract. I don't believe we have anything on that action item today. Does anybody have anything to discuss on that, or we'll just move on to the next item? Okay, move on to the next item. Information items, monthly budget report for September.
Yes, for the month of September, we basically had, under state sources in terms of revenue for Fund 10, we had our state equalization aid payment of $7,468,000 received in September. This is calculated by using 15% of the 2013-14 certified amount, and that basically was the majority of the revenue that we received in the month of September. So overall, in the general fund, in terms of the revenue side, the districts received 5.9% of the annual fiscal year-to-date revenue anticipated. And the reason for the difference between last year, fiscal year-to-date, is in July of 2013, there was a capital lease entry of $2.2 million to reflect the value of the Apple equipment received. So that accounts for the difference from this year's fiscal year-to-date. And then going into our Fund 10 salaries and benefits, the reason for the difference in September from the previous year is in last September, it was due to the accrued 12-13 teacher retro pay. That was reversed in September of last year, but the actual expense did not hit last year until November. So when it comes through November, we'll be caught up fiscal year to date in our comparisons from the previous year. And the same thing goes for in transportation. When we started our transportation contract, they were billing it differently. So we did get a partial bill for the month of September. We had 28 days in last year's September, and this year it's based on a monthly basis. So it's just based on a timing difference. And so that same thing holds true when you look at Fund 27, when you're comparing the retro pay and the transportation. So that's the reason for the difference from the previous fiscal year. And that basically sums it up. There's still, we're going to get into more activity as we go through, this month of October. But it was the equalization aid payment and the differences in timing for the retro pay and the transportation.
Okay, any questions? Mr. Edlin?
Just one quick question, Joe. Are we locked in for our fuel costs for this coming year for propane? And are we at or about the same level we were last year?
$1.80 a gallon,
How much was it last year?
$1.80.
$1.80, we're locked in the same. They're
Yep.
predicting another cold winter, so that's a good thing. Thank you.
And that's because they can take advantage of a national contract with Feral Gas.
And they do have their own on-site storage tank completed and up, and so they won't need delivery.
Operational, correct.
Right. Okay, very good, thank you.
Okay. You have a budget update?
We do. And I'm going to apologize for all the numbers I'm throwing at you on the attachment. The primary thing I wanted to mention tonight is normally at the first meeting in October, we go through the preliminary adoption of our budget and the preliminary setting of the levy in order to do a cash flow borrowing. And you'll notice there's no cash flow borrowing here tonight. That's because our fund balance is now sufficient to carry us through those low points, at least based on our projection it is. So at this point, I'm not recommending that we go out and do a cash flow borrowing. For one thing, we aren't showing a deficit, so technically we cannot go out and do a borrowing. What we can do is a line of credit. And if our cash flow swings and starts to shift away and dips into where we feel, or where it looks like we're going to hit a deficit, that previous month, I'll bring back the recommendation for a line of credit. It takes about a month from the attorney's perspective to get all the documents in place. But at this point, our low point is looking at about 2.8 million. And so I'm comfortable enough that that's a big enough cushion that we can manage in-house. So at this point, no additional expense we're looking for interest expense.
Mr. Como?
When do we predict that low point, the 2.8 million to hit?
The last week in November.
Okay.
And payroll is, I believe, the 28th of November, and state aid comes in on December 1st. Like $12 million payment.
Okay.
I mean, so literally, we are talking a day.
Days, yeah.
Yeah, payroll is on a Friday, and then the state money comes in on the first Monday.
Mr. Edlin?
What's our unaudited fund balance?
It's roughly 30 million. It went up about
30 million?
$8 million. You'll get the full report next month with the audit. Over 4 million of that is because of our self-funding and health insurance. So in November, along with your audited reports, I'm going to ask you to set up a reserve for self-insurance so that we can earmark those dollars specifically for the years where the health claims go in the other direction.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, when you come out with that information, Lori, I'm going to assume that you're going to, like in the past, you'll show what's unrestricted and what has restrictions placed on it, because
Correct.
it's not
So-
all unrestricted. So there's other things that we do within the district that have restrictions on it, and not just the health insurance, that's a new one.
Correct.
That we'll be looking to adding. So we should get the whole picture. Do you know roughly what the unrestricted is?
Do you recall,
23.
about 23 million?
Okay, yeah, that seems about more in line with,
Yeah. And again, I
We
have to
thought so.
point out, fund balance is not cash.
No, it's
You
not
know,
a pile of
it's
cash
net.
somewhere.
So,
Yes.
at different points and different, like I said, it's, at our projection low point, cash is gonna be down to under $3 million, so.
yeah, okay.
Just putting in context, most districts have a fund balance to where they don't have to borrow. Right. We've been the exception where we've, over the years, had to borrow, sometimes in a significant amount, and, the way we changed our compensation schedule and some other things has allowed us to improve our fund balance. But we've always had a goal of improving it. I think it's important to note the statement that Ms. Clifton just made, that's not free cash. And so it's not like we have $30 million just sitting around, The other part is it has to be put in context of our overall budget. As a percentage of our overall budget, is it, and the problem is it's not free cash, but as a percentage of our overall budget, it's less than 20%.
I was
Right?
gonna say, we might be at 20%.
Yeah, it's less than 20. I think it's less than 20 because we're at probably 155 million on,
Yeah.
yeah. Mr. Como?
We do have a policy that directs us to build our fund balance up to a certain point, and that policy also states that once we get to a certain point, we need to start to look and see what makes sense for the district. So perhaps what you may want to do at our next meeting is to provide us with that policy, copy of that policy, when we're looking at
We
that?
actually are taking that policy to policy
Oh,
committee.
okay.
In October, because there's some changes in the generally accepted, the GASBs that dictate the terms for restricted fund balance. There's committed, assigned, there's new definitions, and our current policy doesn't match the language.
So we have to update
So that policy
to
does need
match
to
the
get updated.
GASB requirements? Okay. We should understand what those are also once we go through that.
Mr. Adlin?
I'm glad that the fund balance is built up to that point now where we don't have to do the borrows, because that saves us from having to spend money on things that are not related to education. So that's a good thing. I'm kind of surprised, but maybe, I was trying to keep this in context, what our auditor presented last year to us, and that was, he noted that our fund balance was higher than what was recommended for governmental entities, and that might not have been for school districts, which we've got such an odd revenue expenditure cycle that happens from when we actually get our money put in the bank from the state, and we run out at the end of the year. He was saying that the amount, we actually exceeded that amount before this amount that we have in there now as a percentage of the overall budget. I think he said it was 18%, if I'm not mistaken, which was low compared to what we had at the time, and now we're even above that. So again, I think it's good being fiscally responsible to have that amount in there so that we can actually spend our money on education. So, good.
One other item is, it wasn't too long ago, we used to have discussions about OPEB and unfunded liability. And if you balance this against our unfunded liability, we don't have a fund balance. Right?
Like you said,
If
it's
we were-
not cash and it's
If we were to take
not.
that money and put it to a reserve for our OPEB, we would still be not in the black. So, the idea is that some people say, and I think that's been the push, is for you guys to be clean on your books, you should have you fully funded your post-employment benefits. We don't have that.
No.
Nobody else does either, but the reality is that when we talk about this fund balance being big, relative to our obligations, it's not big.
Yeah. Actually, the county is fully funded. Waukesha County is on their OPEB.
So,
And then if I can just have you look at the tax levy summary. There's still estimates in place, but I can tell you the revenue cap number in under budget B should be pretty close to accurate now. It'll be slightly higher than we originally were looking at. We still do not have the certified state equalization aid number. But the property tax valuations in the bottom are now finalized. So you can see there's quite a swing by municipality as far as growth or decline in values. It ranges from a 1.5% reduction for the town of Brookfield to a 5.2% increase in the city of Brookfield. But on average, we are going to see a property growth of 2.1%. And given that mix, if our levies were as originally budgeted, given those allocations in that center section, you can see what we would levy for each of those municipalities and what the change would be over the prior year. Just informational. But again, the levy information is still estimate at this point. And
Any
that's all
other-
I have.
any other questions? Okay, well, that's it for this evening. Thank you all. Meeting's adjourned.